Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. I'm super excited to have another conversation with someone that isn't directly in healthcare, but has certainly helped me as a healthcare human with something that I think we don't talk a lot about in general, and especially in healthcare. We have very weird, not confrontational, not direct conversations about this topic, which is money. And it's something that I was noticing well before I even heard of coaching or anything. I was noticing that I had a lot of like emotional baggage and beliefs around money. And so when I started like learning about coaching and going through different trainings to become a coach, on one of those trainings, I met this fabulous human that I'm speaking with, and then have done a little bit of work with her on helping myself have change my relationship to what I was thinking about money. And so I thought it'd be fun to have Rachelle on just to talk more, not only about my experience, but just talk in general about like why we're all so mixed up about money. So, Rachelle, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joan. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I always love to sink into a great conversation with you, so I'm looking forward to this. So my name is Rachelle Siebke, and I'm a money coach for life coaches and other heart-centered, purpose-driven business owners. I would say that the common thread is they're doing work in the world that really matters to them. And that's why they own a business. But without that piece, they might not be running a business, right? They're not like your typical, like, I'm a business owner because I want to run a business. They're more like, I have no other choice but to do the work in the world the way that I feel called to do it. And I know that money is going to be a part of that, right? Like, I know I'm going to have to figure out a good system that doesn't feel terrible in order for me to sustainably keep up my practices, both in business and at home.
Yep. That's awesome. Yeah. I thought I'd start by like sharing a little bit of how I was coming to you. And I have in the past talked a bit about money shame, but I thought it would be interesting even just to talk through some of the stuff that came up while we were working together. Um, and I would say, like, the first thing that I noticed is that despite being in practice, so like, as in basically owning a small business or partially owning a small business for 10 years as a like outpatient family physician. That's the model of that is I get income through OHIP. So like an insurance company, tax funded insurance company, I get all this income through there and I use it not only to pay myself, but also to pay a bunch of staff. Like I've been a small business owner for a long time, but even saying that, like now I don't cringe, but 6 months ago I would have been like, oh, am I? I'm not even sure. Because like underneath that, I would say one of my underlying beliefs about myself is that I'm bad with money. I'm curious how often you hear that belief with, I mean, if you've had that belief yourself or if you've worked with people that also had that belief beyond myself.
Yeah. I would say 100% of the clients that I begin to work with think that they're bad with money before they work with me.
Yeah.
And I personally would identify as somebody who thought I was really good with money. But what I was really good at was I was really good at managing the money that I had. So on my end of the spectrum, I was lacking in that belief that it was possible for me to make as much money or more money than I was making before, right?
Yeah.
And for entrepreneurs, what often happens for them is they really sort of shame themselves for being good at I just needed to do this and I'll figure the rest of it out later.
Mm.
And then, so they make that decision to go ahead and do the thing and then sort of shame themselves the whole way along that they should have already had a plan in place. They should have already known what to do with their money ahead of time. And then, as you and I worked on, there's just a lot of layers that come in from our families of origin, from our socialization. Even if we think of ourselves as independent, strong women in every other aspect, we can still accidentally be socialized to think that we're not good with money and we should defer it to our partner if our partner is male, or even if our partner is not male, right? We still might think like maybe somebody else knows better how to do this than I do. So yeah, I would say that's very common.
Yeah. And I think that like deferring to other people knowing more thing, I can see definitely origins of that even. And I know you work with majority, if not like if your clients are mostly identifying as female. I think there's pretty good data that the socialization is different, most men, most women, if you will. Um, and in terms of just in general deferring to authority, I feel like even through medical school and residency, like there would be times where whether like it was a financial planner or an insurance person would come and they'd be like, if you do this, then that's the wrong way. So definitely you got to do it this way and watch out for this. And there's a lot of like fear and shame based sort of tactics where you're like, oh my gosh, but I don't even know, but I haven't like, like that whole thing. And then we as professionals, like, and colleagues like pass it around to each other like, oh, did you hear about this person? Like there's a lot of like judgmental one right way to manage money, and if you don't do money right then you're bad. So I can see actually that like that layer. There's also the layer of like, yeah, my relationship with my husband, which we can talk about in a minute, but even like in the professional sphere, definitely there was just a lot of messaging that like, oh, why would you invest in blah blah, and like using all these acronyms I had heard. And so then you just feel dumb, like you're not even a part of the conversation anyway, so you're like, well, it must be because I'm bad with money. And it's sort of like, is that intentional? Maybe not those individual people, but there's something happening there, you know?
I do think it's the number one lie that we get is this propaganda that there's such a thing as one mistake that we could make that would just totally ruin us and we would never be able to recover from it.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, as far as the hierarchy goes, yes, men are socialized differently than women. And men are hurt just as much by the socialization of the hierarchy as women, just in different ways.
Yes.
And so I really like to point out that even though women are taught explicitly or implicitly that a male may be better at making those money decisions than she is, or frankly, that she has enough things already. She's already got all the plates in the house spinning, so let him take care of the other bigger investments or the other bigger decisions or the other, like one more thing on your plate. But also, men really aren't taught what to do either. I think specifically in North America, in the US, and in Canada, we get most of our financial information from banking institutions.
Yeah.
So we need to really ask ourselves who is benefiting from this financial education, and is it really for us? I find that this idea that one right or wrong way of financial advice is trite financial advice. You could read millions of articles and books and podcasts, and you're often going to get the same perspective. And that perspective, in my opinion, is advice for the average status quo. So if you're not an average status quo person, perhaps it doesn't really apply to you. And I would say that's definitely true for medical professionals and entrepreneurs as well, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's always just a good question in general when you're getting advice, especially if that advice is very like, if you're not doing this way, you're an idiot. First of all,
Mhm.
just like suspicious advice anyway. But then also asking yourself, why does this person have this opinion? And is it because they're trying to sell me something? The answer is usually yes. Like, right? Like, who benefits from me believing that that organization knows more about money than me? It's usually that organization gets to benefit, right? So, um, yeah, that's so true. I think it's been interesting, and I mean, it's we're two individual examples, but I am married to a man, and the way that we've both sort of evolved our thinking around money and what may have come up based on our socialization. Like I would say, my husband more likely to feel pressure to know everything and to have answers, and then my default sort of like, I don't know, you decide, and that actually not being something that even my husband is that excited about. Like he doesn't want to feel like he's the only one in charge of it all either. That's a lot of pressure on him, and so that's just showing how like the patriarchy is hurting everyone in the dynamic. And it was something that it was so interesting. Like I came um to work with you. I was thinking it'd be nice to know like a system of like, and actually just look at my numbers and like know what I'm even looking at. And that's something that you helped me with, like kind of build an actual budgeting money flow type system that I understand that works well, which is amazing. And one of the most common things that I get like held up on, or that would induce an emotional reaction within me, was the idea of like, but what is my husband going to think? And it's like really was not based on data of him hurting me or in any way having a terrible reaction to me, but it was just my internalized, like it was like a deep people pleasing thing that really money is such a potent, I don't know, what is it about money? Well, it's like the thing that buys stuff. So, it's a way you get things. But like there's so much power around, there's so much like guilt associated with it's like, oh, well, I have to ask him before I can spend money. Or if he thinks I've spent money wrong, then that's threatening our relationship. Like they're all so tied to each other. You know what I mean?
I do. And you and I have both done a lot of somatic emotional work outside of um, like our usual niche, right? Like you for healthcare, me for money, and then the somatic experience I brought on for myself in my personal life, and I know for you, it's very similar. And what we know for sure is most of us were not raised unintentionally, like very accidentally, very well meaning by our parents mostly. Um, but we were not raised to stay connected through disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
This term changed my life when my somatica coach said, how do you stay connected through disappointment? And I thought, what in the actual are you even talking about right now? I didn't even know that was an option. I've never even considered that. And so when we think about our parents raising us and how did they discipline us when it came to behavior, or when it came to them being disappointed with the way that we maybe spent our allowance money, or the way that we spent, the money that came to us through birthday cards, or the way that we spent money throughout college or young adulthood. It's very common for us to have these memories and experiences that are very separating because somebody was disappointed and they didn't know, they didn't have the tools to stay connected through that disappointment. And so we feel very emotionally unsafe in that disappointment. And if we haven't done the work to sort of understand where that feeling came from, where that disconnection was, how to create that safety for ourselves, and then make calmer, more creative choices, it's no wonder that we get stuck on money in relationships.
Yeah, it makes the stake so much higher, right?
Yeah.
And I see that both. I know I'm not the only one who struggles with it, even in relationship. And I will say, like, at this point, it feels so much better. And it was funny. It was a little bit me being like, well, now I've started looking at my money. So I know some of the numbers, like maybe 2%. And then like 98% was like, I'm going to stay with myself. I'm going to regulate my nervous system. If I start getting upset, I'm not going to immediately react in the middle of this budget conversation. I'm going to take a sip of water and take a breath. And then, like, it's literally then the whole conversation's completely different because of I'm regulating my nervous system. And so then even what I'm saying and then he's reacting, it's like we now have quite enjoyable budget conversations. Yeah, we were already having like budget dates every every other week because that's how we roll in my household. And those were like okay, but I would have moments where I'd be like, oh, and I get defensive or whatever. Now they are actually just enjoyable because we're like, here's the money. And even when it's like, oh, look, too much money spent in this area, or what should we do about it? Like the process you're saying, which is like staying through disappointment, and it has nothing to do with actually money. It's about relationship. It just feels so different. So thanks for that. That was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to interject a
Yes.
little. This is a little bit of personal work on my end, where my ongoing thought is always like, what if this person doesn't like me? So
Yes.
it comes up everywhere. And I know I'm not the only one, so I think this is a good example. In doing my awareness and exploration work recently, I have noticed that when I'm thinking, I don't like this person, or this person doesn't like me, what's actually happening is I physically don't feel well around that person.
Mm.
And then I think my brain short circuits to that person doesn't like me, and or I don't like this person.
Mm.
And so the reason I think this is important is because if we see relationships with money as the same as we see with relationships with other people, we will notice when I am doing something with money, I don't physically like the way I feel. So my brain short skips to, I don't like to deal with money, or I don't like money, or money doesn't like me, right?
Oh,
But
that's
when
so
we
good.
can notice like what's actually happening is I don't physically feel well in my body. And I actually have a completely different process than we have been taught through the life coach school that we both attended. I have recently, for my own self coaching, started the process of just comforting my physical sensations before I ever try to think about anything differently. And so I find that when I'm in shame, my throat hurts like I have strep throat. Like, I don't know if everybody experiences shame this way, but that's definitely my key indication that I'm in shame is if my throat swells up and it hurts like I really have strep throat. And so what I've started doing instead of anything else is just putting my fingertips on my glands and massaging my throat until that physical sensation has gone. Another one, if I feel anxiety sort of in my chest, I will put my hand on my collarbone and just rub it in a circle. It feels like almost if you've ever held a baby or a toddler and just sort of rubbed their back. It is so comforting and soothing, even as an adult, to do that for myself. So those are some ways that I can get myself back to calm,
Yeah.
so that I can find another creative solution.
I'm a big fan of like, let's just let our feelings be, let's metabolize them. And I love the rubbing your chest one. So thank you. Because that was really it. It wasn't like think of a different way to think of your husband or think of yourself or think of money. Those sort of came naturally, but it was more like how to stay with yourself through the physical reactions that come up in conversations about money. That was sort of the Everest, just because it's like it's another person and it's about the money part and the person part. But even like sitting in front of my spreadsheets or my QuickBooks, right? Like I would have physical sensations, and maybe just trying to watch something while I'm doing it and get out there as quick as possible. And then it's kind of no wonder I didn't know my numbers. Like I was actively trying to shield myself from the numbers that make me feel terrible. So then, yeah, it's not like I'm dumb or I don't know about math. Like there was a point in one of our conversations where I was like, but I do know basic math, so I think I can figure out, and I can use a calculator, like, but
Mm-hmm.
I can know that this number is larger or smaller than this number, and that's actually I think all the math I need to know in this particular
Yeah.
case. But when you're like reacting and your brain is just like flatlining and you're just running out of there, I love that. So it's not that I don't like money or bad at money. It's that I don't like the physical sensations I feel when I think or try and interact or talk about money. And that's because of like the stories and socialization that I've had. But even if I don't know about the socialization, just useful to know that's really what's going on. That's so helpful.
Also, you and I had taken an advanced certification where we talked a lot about socialization. And in that process, I have gained this 3-step trilogy where it's, let's think about, here's what's happening. Let's validate that. So it's validation and then information. Like, it makes so much sense that you think or feel this way. And then here's the origin of some of the historical facts about money, about women, about socialization, about capitalism, about imperialism, about racism, about ableism, about ageism, right? Like, here's some reasons why you might have absorbed some of these things. Even if you don't purposely, consciously think them, they may have been absorbed into your psyche accidentally without your permission. So here's some information. And now let's do some exploration where we're like, how do we want to think and feel about that? What are some other options?
Yeah, I love that because that's when you can think creatively about it, right? Yeah. I wanted to touch I want to talk more about the creativity, and I thought it would be helpful to share some of what I see as like probably unintended, well, definitely unintended consequences of not doing this sort of work and not, I sort of step one is like getting help with or on your own, learning to stay with the feelings of money. And instead, because I see that instead we act them out. So I definitely see, I think whether we are thinking it consciously or even subconsciously, I have been in a state myself and have witnessed other folks in a state where if they're like, I'm being underpaid, that means I'm undervalued as a human. And that's a hard thing. It's not, I think we can have, like, say, a political argument if someone deserves more money for the work they're doing, for sure. But when we're feeling like we're not valued, that is hard, especially, like, and now I'm feeling like I don't have value as a person. That's tricky. And then, especially if then we are, say, viewing that as a barrier between ourselves and our patients or ourselves and our staff, because we are so thinking that like there isn't anything that we can do to change our situation and our perspective on money. So then it's like, you're stealing my life from me, or like, there's something that really tricky that can happen where we start to view, I've seen colleagues that really view either people that are working for them or patients themselves as like sources of income in a way that means that they are having trouble connecting to them as humans. And so that's what, and they can be pretty harmful. I've been on the recipient end of that. Like when I was working for another doctor, like near the beginning of my career, and some of the ways that locum, this is what we call it, went down. I can see now very clearly that they were about money stories that that person carried, but it really felt very terrible to me to feel like, I won't get into the details because I don't want to make it obvious what happened, but like it was clear that money was the thing that was in the way. Um, so say that person had a different money story where it's like, oh gosh, maybe this was more money than I anticipated, but I'm going to figure a way to do it. Instead of taking it out on me, they could have gone a different route, right? And same with like with patients where it's like, you're taking too much of my time, you're not worth my, right? Like, it's just tricky when we think that there aren't other creative solutions, and
Mm-hmm.
instead we are like actually acting it out on other people. I've seen how that can be pretty harmful to ourselves, for sure, and even to people around us. So definitely great to find another way to view things where, what if we have inherent value, and we can learn to think creatively about this resource. I really like to think of like money is this resource that we have, and it even actually makes it easier and less like burnoutable to advocate for adding more resources, where it's like, hey, whether it's an insurance company or government, it's like, if you want me to deliver more things, I will need more of this resource, please. Instead of being like, I deserve more money, and You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
it actually helps you have a more sustainable, it's a more sustainable relationship to have with money, which means that even if you are advocating to be paid more, um ironically it's like less personal, and that makes it, in my opinion, more effective. Like you often are more
Mm-hmm.
effective in how you're doing it. It's when we sort of tie it all up with our own personal worth, and notice that it actually doesn't matter either way. Like if you have too much of it, then that means that you're corrupt and evil or whatever. If you don't have enough of it or whatever, like there's ways you can judge someone no matter how much money they have. And we
Mm-hmm.
see all of those. So when we take it outside of ourselves, that's like when I sat with my emotions and then sort of took money outside of a personality trait of mine and instead was like, well, what is it on a more neutral basis? Oh,
Yeah.
it's some not actually that complicated math, that if I, especially if I have a nice system where I put the numbers in and then it tells me, you know, will these numbers cover those numbers? Yes or no? And if not, I can then not panic, but think creatively about like, okay, well, what are my options? It's like a game, like, or something. Like it's like a puzzle versus an indictment of my worth and safety,
Mm-hmm.
which just
Yeah.
feels a lot more intense, you know?
Yeah. The software that I teach clients to use, which you've been using,
Yeah.
is YNAB, which is an acronym that stands for You Need a Budget. And one of the favorite pieces of feedback I've gotten from anybody on it is that it makes money feel like Tetris. It's like, how do I fit this puzzle together?
Yes.
And also the other thing that my clients receive is a spreadsheet where you do just enter the numbers. The decisions have been made ahead of time. We put these percentages in, and sort of it does. It's like a self-calculating payday calculator, which makes everything really easy to see. But going back to the original thing that you were prompting, to me, what you're saying is like, yeah, it's this really understandable mistake that we make when we commoditize people,
Mm, mm-hmm.
right? Whether they're our clients or our employees or, you know, other, other, um, our patients or other people in the room. Like who are the people that we're commoditizing because we got temporarily hijacked and forgot that resources are not just money. Resources include time, money, energy, and decision making skills. And when we can see them as a whole, I think it's fascinating when we start talking about why do we want to have money? And the real reason when you say like, well, why do you want that? And why do you want that? And why do you want that? At the end of the day, what people want is to be able to have options and to be able to have time freedom. And when we're not aware, we accidentally trade our money
Mm-hmm.
for time freedom and options. We actually accidentally put more time and more take away more decisions so that we can have more money, which at the end of the day, the only reason we want the money is so that we have downtime and so that we have the ability to make decisions. We want options. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. It actually reminds me just this past weekend, we were considering signing one of my sons up for karate classes. And it was a really fascinating experience. It was like kind of, there was another mom that was also getting the pitch at the same time. It was like this trial class. And then but it was like, if you sign up for 1 year of karate classes after this trial class, you'll get all this money off. And the mom who was with me was like, this feels like we're getting like a timeshare presentation. It was very interesting. Like the model of this karate organization was interesting. Um, and it was sort of like, it was a good little test of all of the work I've done around money. Cause like, I'm very like, oh my gosh, I have to say yes, or, and what if, and the main thing I was worried about though, besides like all the weird pressury stuff is like, um I don't want to like disappoint my son by not signing him up if he really wants to do it. But then the thing I was balancing is like, first of all, setting up for a whole year, a 6-year old for a whole year when the plan was to have him sign up for something for 3 months. And then they also were recommending you go at least twice or three times a week. And that was actually so it, even though, yes, also the money was more than we had budgeted. And we could have said to them, like, no, or I could have even said to myself, oh, we just can't afford it, or it's too much money. And that was one of the variables of like, we don't want to spend this much money on this thing. But actually, it was the time thing of like, I love my son. This is a fun experience he's interested in. I am not sitting in this karate place for a whole year or for like twice a week, which means a weeknight. That just for us, it was like, so I hope that even like follows what your question was. But like when you're saying about like time freedom and choices, like it wasn't so much if we could afford it. It wasn't so much about how much money we would or wouldn't have spent on it. That was one of the factors, but it was more important to think through, what is it that I want? Like, it's a way of making just choices with your life, because well, when you buy something, often you're buying a physical thing, but you're often buying the time you're about to spend, the energy you're about to spend doing or using that thing, or in the case of classes, like the time you spend in the classes. And so it really helped to have like a sense of my values, have a sense of what as a family we want to spend time on. And that makes it really easy to know what to spend money on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I mean, this is some of the most insightful work that I think you and I did together, because we did go
Yeah.
back and look at like, okay, return on investments for past programs, return on investments for like, okay, there's this new offer
Yeah.
that I'm inclined to.
Yeah.
And also, I had already decided that these were my priorities.
Yes.
So, how do I want to go about making this decision? So,
Yeah.
I think that that was some of the deepest work that it was really interesting for me. I mean, I don't know if you recall the exact conversation, but we were
Yeah.
talking about this phrase that we have in the industry, which is like, oh, it's a no brainer offer.
Right.
And you and I had co created this idea of like, why do we think that that is a good thing? Why can't we bring our full brains to our decisions about money?
Yeah.
Why does that make us wrong or scarce or, like you said, frugal? Or like, what is wrong with us having
Our brains on. Yeah.
our brains to make our decisions and our value based priorities?
Yes.
It's like bro marketing meets, I mean, bro marketing meets the coaching industry, or bro marketing meets taekwondo classes, right?
It was
It's
very
like,
bro marketing. It was like intense.
yeah, and again, no shade to the karate class, the taekwondo class. I'm sorry, I don't remember which exact class you were talking about, but this is what happens when we, as business owners, take a sales class and then implement it without really connecting to our values and our priorities, and we treat our clients like commodities, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the main thing. Like, several times, like especially throughout our time working together, like one of the things that I feel like I learned in the process of like getting to know the reaction I have to money and how I spend money, because that's the other part. Like like how I feel when I have the spreadsheet in front of me, but also how I feel when I'm about to buy something. Um, and it's sort of like intuitive eating. If the people listening have heard of that concept, where it's like, instead of dieting or all the kinds of things that we know are actually pretty harmful for our body, it's like, but how do we get in touch with our body to know when we're actually hungry, actually full? And I found like, yeah, so intuitive spending, or in an intuitive way of checking. So like even um I was in a clothing store, and often I do get kind of impulsive and then feel guilty and all of that dynamic. But instead, just sort of like sitting and picturing, when am I going to wear this item? How often do I imagine? How does it feel? Like slowing down the decision making and not having that impulsivity breakthrough. It's very similar to the whole, I think it was karate, not taekwondo, but yes, yeah, karate class. Like, there's so much, we get so much marketing to make us feel no brainer about things and buy more than we might even be happy to buy, or buy different things than we would be ultimately like in line with. And so that was a big piece of that is another big piece of the money stuff. And especially folks like certainly the higher earning folks in healthcare, like physicians and stuff, because they have money. And there's definitely, you can get into the like how many Teslas, and this isn't like anti-Tesla, but like like how many luxury cars, how you could feel like you've got to keep up with the Joneses of like everyone else is taking their kids to Disney World, shouldn't I? And so like taking that breath and being like, yes, what, like again, like you're saying, like values, what is it that what do I want to spend my time doing, as well as thankfully I have resources to spend money. But like it's more about time and like the experience of it. Like even going on a vacation, that was one of the first things, like because you asked like if you had more money than you could ever want, what would you want to do? And I was like, I'd want to go on these vacations. And but then thinking of like what was really underneath that, it's like, well, I'd want to spend time with my family. I'd want to go on adventures with them. And so knowing that we had a certain amount of money, it was interesting to be like, how could we get those exact same experiences without getting on an airplane necessarily? And could we or could we not? Right. And so I found that process really helpful because, again, it's just slowing it down, feeling the feelings that came up because of socialization, and then just thinking creatively. So whether it's about like saving or investing or spending money, it's kind of the same process in all those areas, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think what can be really interesting about that, so the question that I like to ask is, what do I want my life to look and feel like?
Yeah.
And when we know that, it shifts us away from, where do I think I need to spend this money so that I can get to have a life that looks this way and feels this way? But it shifts us back to like, okay, so what would that look like? What would that feel like? How can I do more of that with the money I already have, with the time I already have, with the energy I already have? And now I can use those decision-making skills to really support the resources I already have while I create more resources for myself. But I don't have to wait to enjoy my life until later. I get to do it now. So I'm just putting together this brand new resource. It's called Can I Afford It? It's specifically for business owners, but it's a really interesting process in which it is saying like, okay, here's how much money I have on the sustainable budget of the revenue I currently have. Here's this new thing that I want to bring into my life. And then when you put those numbers together, the calculator basically shows you like, here's how much money you have left, which is this gut reaction thing that comes up, right? Where you're like, because sometimes you're like, I actually would rather have that money than I would rather have that thing. And there is no right or wrong about that, right? So like people can have this reaction whether the amount is really high or really low. And it's not for me to tell them whether they should be making the decision for a yes or a no, but I like to think of this as information, right? So if your body is sending you a signal, what is that about? Do we want to work on having more money available in there so that you feel comfortable with the decision? Or do we want to work on feeling differently about the number that we're seeing? Right? Yeah. There's no one right or wrong way to make the decision, and there's no one right or wrong way to go about what is the problem that you solve.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's like the most important, one of the most important messages is just like there's literally no right or wrong way to use this resource of money, right?
Yeah, because everything in our society tells us that that is not true.
No, there is one right way, but then they all argue about which is the right way.
Yeah, right. And also, like, most of our parents also sent us the message that there was a one right way to do money. Yes. And one very wrong way. Actually, multiple very wrong ways. So, and oftentimes, the reason why we're so resistant to being good with money is because we think that being good with money means we have to restrict ourselves and give up the thing that we want more than anything in the world. So who would want that?
Don't we get to want what we want? Yes. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what you find are common, like socialization patterns around debt, because that's something that's super common. I mean, medical training of all kinds is certainly quite expensive, and the one I know best is like going to medical school and becoming a physician is like super expensive. And the pattern I see is like it's super expensive, you go into lots of debt about it. And then you finally are staff and you're finally making like, whoa, that that paycheck's finally so much better. But often it's right around the same time where you've also potentially just gotten married, bought a house, bought your first car, have young kids. So there's like a lot of costs as well. Plus you see all your colleagues doing all the things, but you have this giant pile of debt as well. And that can feel like it's its own spin of very crushing and stressful. So even though you're making more money than other people in the world are making, not more or less or any guilty way, but like you're making dollars, they feel like they can't be enough. And a lot of it's that the guilt and shame of the debt part. So I'd love to hear how you work with people around it, what kind of things come up for them with debt.
Yeah. So I think this is really interesting conversation to have. So if you don't mind, like just walking me through a little bit more of the doctor experience, because I don't totally understand because I haven't have that lived experience, right?
Yeah.
But I see it a lot where it's like, here's the thing, it's going to cost this much. Let's say college in general, right? So college debt is something that seems to be very acceptable in society and people are really okay with. And then later it becomes a problem, right? And so it's like, do the thing now. There's so much pressure. Take the debt out now. Don't worry about it. You'll worry about that later. And
Yes.
nobody really teaches you how to support yourself all the way through the payoff process. Like you made that decision. At one point, you were really happy with that decision. Now, you might not
Mm.
have had all the information. And again, I would argue that's not your fault. Like, I think that's very purposeful on schools' ends when they're like, have you sign up for debt? They never really tell you how much your payment is going to be. And, they might sort of explain it, but I don't think they lay out in a way that's like a full chart so you can really make those decisions. Like you said, okay, now it's time for me to buy a house. Now it's time for me to buy a car. Now it's time for, like, do I know how much actual available income, how much is my fixed expenses before I start making these? And without really knowing what the debt payoff chart is on a minimum basis and what the debt payoff chart is if I put a little bit more on there, right? And what if I put a lot more on there? And so without having those numbers, it's really difficult. But the message is you shouldn't have debt, even though we told you back here it was fine and you shouldn't worry about it and not to think about it was a no-brainer decision. And now that you're living in the part where you're doing the thing that you made the decision for already, now you should feel wrong about it the whole entire time until you get it paid off. What is your experience there? What do you think about that?
Yes, I think that's exactly it. Like I can recall friends being like, "Thank you, future self," and then buying something with their line of credit, which wasn't right or wrong, but like during medical training, you use the debt to, well, because there's another option, and you have to become a doctor, and that's what you want to become. So like, yes, like of course you're going to go into debt, even going into debt, right? That feels very like, so of course you purchase money from the bank in an agreement way. I'm trying to say like a neutral term that's
Yeah.
understood, that includes basically a rental fee for having the money, which is interest. I don't know if this is,
Yeah,
it's
no,
something
I
like
love
that,
it.
right?
I think
It's
one of the
something like
best
that.
ways I've heard it described before is like, how do I use tomorrow's dollars to fund today's dreams?
Yes. And the person who gives you tomorrow's dollars will ask for a certain number of dollars for giving it to you in advance, and that's the interest, if you will. So that's like kind of what you sign up for. But of course you're going to sign up for that. You're going to become a doctor, right? Or like, so, but then it's like immediately it's like the shame and the heaviness pressure cooker starts ticking once you graduate. and you've now got money coming in, but you often do want to spend it on more things, but it feels like wasteful or irresponsible not to try and pay down your debt. But there are some, but if you like, even if you put your whole paycheck towards paying down your debt, it would still take a number of years, I would think, depending on how much debt you have, but like it would take a while, and then you would have no money to eat. So like there's
Yeah.
like
And
a
is that what
pressure
you want
thing.
your life to look and feel like?
Yes, right? But like because that's the right thing is paying off your debt as fast as possible, which is like amorphous, because like
Yeah.
it's not actually, I like objectively it's not a good idea to pay off your debt literally as fast as possible, which would mean you would starve and live in a box. Like
Right. Or even just, you just don't enjoy your life as much as you could, right? And
even
there's
that,
a
yes.
balance or a ratio and
There's
a
a good
risk
ratio.
tolerance that I think we would just want to have the information so
Yeah.
we can validate our
Yeah.
decisions and then
Yeah.
explore it further. I think that that's really the thing, right? It's like, okay, I mean, first of all, you can choose never to pay off your debt. And
Yes.
there will be like consequences and all kinds of things that happen from you like making those choices. But um, when we think that the actual owing of the debt is creating our relationship with ourselves, when it's creating the experience we get to live our life, that's when it really becomes a problem. So I like to think of it sort of as, I know you've done a lot of calendaring work. I've bought your time course. And so when we think about how do I protect these things ahead of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, how do I protect? These are the things that are really important to me that I want my life to look and feel like. How can I make sure I always get those? And then what's left over? Now I can make a decision. Do I want to accelerate my debt payments with this amount,
Yeah.
knowing that I've already set aside the things that are most important to me coming out? Like that I get to experience them now and not that I put all of today's dollars and all of my future dollars to decisions I made in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, like and something I'm committed this much and now you're not rethinking it each time. That makes sense to me. That sounds way more soothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've experienced that too, right? As we did the
Yeah.
work together. Again, we've talked a lot about like the squishy feelings around money, but when you work with me in the program, there are like mathematical, like actual processes and habits and routines and like systems that are very like how do I say,
Concrete.
like real like
Yeah.
numbers, right? And one of the things that can be really helpful about having those real numbers is that we make our decision one time and then automate them. And then we come back and make another decision at a later date on the calendar. But the whole time in between, we support ourselves and just like celebrate like all of the good things that we're doing, right? Knowing that like my decision has already been made. I've already decided, for instance, on the payday calculator that I don't spend any more than 30% of my revenue on operating expenses. Or if I am spending 40%, it's my goal to get down to 30%. So I'm going to start with 40%. I'm like, okay, is there anything I can do to cut out 1% in the next 3 months? And then I look through my expenses and I'm like, you know what? I actually really hate this software. I wonder if there's another option that's available for me that's cheaper that I will also enjoy more.
Mm-hmm.
Or, oh, this software is expensive, but I love it and I don't want to do this work without this software. Okay, how do I protect these dollars for this software? Because I know for sure I want like this is a value and a priority and in a choice of mine.
Yes.
So yeah, I really think having those decisions made once and then supporting ourselves all the way through it gives us so much space, so much more energy to not be constantly carrying around these like unmade decisions in our head.
Yes.
So draining.
So draining. I'm mindful of time, and I obviously could talk to you forever, Rachelle, because that's what we usually do.
Mhm.
So I would say, well, the first thing I would ask is if anyone listening is interested in your resources around money for them, where would they find you?
So I'm on my website is RachelleSiebke.com. And you can find how to spell that in the show notes, but it's
Yes.
Rachelle and then SIEBKE.com. And I'm also RachelleSiebke.com, or excuse me, RachelleSiebke.moneycoach on Instagram. And I would say there's three resources that I find to be super fun and very relevant to this conversation. So one is my money guide, and you'll get that on my homepage, which is all about creating nurturing money habits and routines that feel good. So to take us out of these like boring, dreadful money relationships and more into like, okay, what would it look like if I just started to see these money tasks as a little bit more enjoyable? And then the other one is how to trust yourself with money. So we talk a lot about all of the socialization of like, it makes so much sense that you second guess all of your decisions. Here's why you might be second guessing your decisions. Here's how to have your own back instead. So that's another really great one, and I'll give you the link for that. And then the one that I'm just creating, which I think is really, really fun, is Can I Afford It? It's an entrepreneurial edition where you put in your fixed monthly expenses. I teach you three questions that you need to ask, three numbers that you need to have, how to find those three numbers, and then three questions you can ask yourself to help you understand what your gut reaction to seeing those numbers is.
I love that. And I will definitely look it up because I just like having something to help me because the ways we ask that question are not helpful. Or my default ways of asking that question are not helpful. So it's just like here it is, and this means I have this many less potatoes saved for winter, if you will. Like, right? So
Yeah, and my favorite thing about that Afford It research, Can I Afford It, is it includes a decision chart, which always gives you the opportunity to get to yes. So many of us are used to making our decisions based off our bank account balance. Like, does my bank, right? So talking about socialization, we might have like shifted from like, is it okay with my mom or my dad if I spend my money this way? To, is it okay with my bank account? Does my bank account say yes or no to this decision? And it's accidental, and it makes so much sense because we really have been trained to stay connected to people by them approving of the way that they think that we're spending our money. So it makes so much sense.
yeah.
But what I like to teach people instead is like, okay, if that number is not a place where it makes you feel comfortable to move ahead, here's some questions you can ask yourself. And then when we arrive to this place is like, do I still want to do this thing? Sometimes the answer is no, and you can just exit the decision. But it's such a peaceful decision because instead of like, I don't have enough money, my bank account said no, right? Where you sort of feel like you're like stomping off. It's like, no, I've peacefully made this decision. Like, I actually don't want this thing anymore. I'd rather have my money. Or we might get to the place where it's like, you know what? I do still want this thing, but I want this number to look like this before I have that thing. And so how can we create that?
Yeah. It might be in a little while or after I've earned more income or saved more or something, right? Like, but there could always be a way.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a money way, and sometimes it's a time and energy way, and sometimes it's a like different shift of perspective. Like all of those things are available. So I just really like to always point out that all things are always available when we can be calm and creative about our money resources.
Oh, I love calm and creative. That's just lovely. It's lovely. I feel calmer and more creative just saying the words calm and creative. So thank you,
Yeah.
Michelle. So the last question I like to ask is, so just considering the folks who are listening, who are all sorts of different healthcare professionals and may have some solid, gnarly money stories that they're carrying with them that are even, making it hard for them to know, well, how could I say no to this patient? How could I cut back my hours? Like they're struggling with money. What's like a final thing you want to say to them? Like words of encouragement? Like what is it that you want them to hear from you?
Mm. I mean, I think the thing that can be most satisfying and immediate is that comforting yourself, like figuring out where you're feeling the discomfort in your body and physically comforting it, like not talking yourself out of it, but like really find some way that you could imagine somebody comforting you if you were a toddler. Because those things, those physical comforts are still available to us and we can give them to ourselves at any given time. Like you can go in an empty patient room, shut the door, and do that for yourself right now. Oftentimes I'll ask somebody, like, what is your body craving that you can afford to give it right now? Sometimes it's 3 deep breaths. Sometimes it's rubbing your temples. Sometimes it's rubbing your swollen shame glands on your throat, right? Like you can give yourself an actual like squeeze, give yourself a hug. Like there's so many things that we can do that really do comfort and calm that nervous system. And I know it's so easy to write off and it sounds ridiculous and stupid, but this is the thing that gets us to the calm place so that we can be creative again.
I love that. I thank you for that reminder for me, Rachelle. I always need it.
Welcome. Thanks for
All
having me. It
right.
was a really great conversation with you again today, Jen.
Yes, always. We will always have the conversations, Rachelle. All right. And for everyone else listening, I'll talk to you next week.